Hey everybody, Ryan McCaffrey with IGN here. I'm joined by Bill Gardner. You might be wondering who he is and why we're playing a nearly 10-year-old BioShock game. Number one, because it's one of the best games ever, best games last generation. Number two, Bill, you were a level designer, eventually one of the lead designer on BioShock, and this early section of the game, the Welcome to Rapture, this was your baby.
That's right. I was, obviously, Irrational was a super talented team, and I was lucky enough to work with, people like Steven Alexander and obviously Ken and Nate at the beginning of this. But this Welcome to Rapture level is where I spent a good deal of my time, making the intro to the experience, essentially, making sure that was clear and grabbed you, make sure it immersed you, and just really setting the tone for the game. And gotta say, it's definitely surreal seeing it now.
Well, the art direction's so damn good. It holds up rather nicely for being an old 720p last gen game, huh?
You had to bring up the 720, didn't you?
No. Well, that was the normal then.
No, absolutely. I think that again, amazingly talented team. Scott, Nate, and the whole art crew, just phenomenal talent, and I think it was just a hungry team. People really were after it. They really felt like they had something to prove here. I think we did in a lot of ways. Watch your right, watch out, he's coming for you. To your right. I tried.
You may have done this a few times before.
Sure. Yeah, and I think I look. Having not played this in geez, I don't even know how long, a few years anyway. It's amazing how all of the little pieces are coming back, all the little quirks of development and the little stories that that go into creating this, like that little lock right there. The fact that you have to get Electro Bolt and the sort of the pains we went through to train that and to sort of like pace out all of the elements we're training. And if you look right there, the plasmid sign and just all the pieces we do to lure you to your goal and to make sure that things are trained organically. It's a huge challenge.
So how many iterations? Because obviously at the beginning of the game, I've heard this from a million developers, and I suspect you would echo it. The beginning of the game is the most important because that's what everyone that plays your game is going to experience at the beginning. It may sound dumb and obvious, but it's true. So how many iterations, is what we see here of Welcome to Rapture anything like the original version of it?
It's funny because there are always skeletal pieces that echo throughout the development. Like this particular sequence right here, this sequence was probably one of the most iterated pieces of my experience at Irrational. There's so many different critical pieces of information we're trying to get across. And so immense effort into making all this make sense. And you specifically, this first hour or so when we brought this to focus tests and usability tests, and people beat the shit out of this game. I think we've talked about it before, but they were giving it 2 out of 10 and 3 out of 10 and calling it a cheap man's Half-Life and all this awful stuff. And
wow.
It was heartbreaking. But at the same time, we went into that test thinking we had something special, and we knew that we had the seeds of this amazing baby. But it needed a lot more time and a lot more explanation. I think that one of the trickiest parts of development is you obviously become enamored with your own work, but
right.
You also don't realize what you don't know and what people aren't going to get. And so this sequence right here, BioShock is about mystery. It's about sort of peeling away the layers of the onion, is one thing that Ken used to say, and trying to figure out what the correct order of operations and what the right order of expositing information, and then the best way to do that only comes out of beating yourself up, iterating the hell out of it, and then just being honest and willing to change it as you're wrong time and time again. Here's another sequence right here. This plane crash. This was something that was in the very, very first drafts of the level. We always had this idea that you're in the plane crash, and then later on it's going to come slamming through this tunnel that you're walking through, and a lot of iterations, including the part where at one point I made it so that you actually have to crawl up through the plane right here and then come out this emergency exit. I thought that would be cute. But making that work, that was only through, a million iterations. And actually, Stephen Alexander, the effects artist in this game, who is genuinely one of the most talented people I've ever worked with, just give it to him and he gets it right, and so that was always hugely rewarding, is to have an idea and to bounce it around with people and get some iterations in, and then to have him or one of the other artists, take that idea and run with it and make it real and make it, I think, incredibly memorable.
So looking back, what is your favorite part of this early sequence, the Welcome to Rapture sequence?
I think, I love a lot of it, and there are a lot of pieces here that I love because of what they eventually became. And in the next room coming up, there's a sequence that I spent a lot of time on that, frankly, I never really got right, and we actually tweaked it so that it would work. And I'll talk about that in a second, as soon as you stop getting lit up by the splicer.
Yeah, I was trying to get creative with it. It's all right, let's just beat him down.
I'm a big fan of the baby carriage splicer. It's funny how such a small little thing, it's one of those things that you wouldn't think about it, but that did actually have quite a few iterations. And originally I put it in as just sort of an ode to the Jurassic Park Rapture scene, where the girl is, they're in the kitchen and they see the Raptor puppet's head up through the door. Remember that sequence? Obviously I didn't exactly hit that, but when you come up the elevator, you see the first glimpse at the splicer, and that's sort of where my head was at. But then the sequence wasn't really working, and eventually Ken came with the idea. I was like, oh, we'll put a baby carriage there, and we'll put the gun in there, and so it's sort of an iconic moment born out of the seed of a different moment. So I was very pleased to be a part of that sequence, but I think obviously Ken was the one who put the real spice on it. So this sequence right here, actually, if you want to back up for a second here, you get locked in. Now originally this was one way that we were going to train. I don't remember exactly what it is, but you get locked in here, and there's this explosion, and then it starts flooding. And so I had this idea of like a timed pressure training moment where you had to go, and I believe you had to shock something or pick something up as the fire went out. I think it was a key or something like that. I don't remember exactly what I was training, but a lot of people were dying here, and frankly, the mechanic of the resurrection stations, they didn't tolerate failure particularly well. So we made this sort of an optional little moment. It's just a little bit of spice when you're exploring the space. And it's like, oh, there's a little bit of a flood, and it's just there for show. But I spent a lot of time trying to make that work, and ultimately the way to make it work was make it into a little bit of flair, I guess.
So, as a lifelong game player, let me ask you, when you're making this section of the game here, is obviously very linear. What's the secret to making linear level design interesting?
There are a lot of answers to that. I think the one of the most important. Oh, hold on. Here's that Jurassic Park sequence I was talking about before. So again, telegraphing the threat long before, and then Ken, obviously she's singing a lullaby, a known lullaby, but he wrote it and he added his own little twist on it. And it's really, if you listen to her, it's really quite sick and perverted. And then sure enough, you look in the, one of the things we were trying to figure out is when's the right time to get the player his first weapon. And at one point through my iterations on the level, I was convinced that gamers, because at the time, it was a very different time when this came out, I didn't think that people would tolerate the slow burn, I guess you could say, of this. There's a lot of tension building, and I was convinced that people are going to be like, get me to the action, And so earlier on, I actually gave you a really powerful weapon. I think it was the grenade launcher, and you just sort of get a few shots at it. Just say like, oh, don't worry, it's a shooter. You can shoot things. Don't worry. And that turned out to be the wrong decision, and like Ken really pushed, and a lot of the team pushed back and said like, let's give the player some credit. Let's let them. We think that they're gonna like this. We think we can immerse them and win them over without having to get all crazy shootery.
It's funny. I would think that we'd say that now, like, oh, you don't have time for the slow burn now of a shooter. That's funny that you thought that back then.
Yeah, I think things do tend to go in cycles, to be honest. But you were asking before about what was it?
Yeah, how do you make a as we find an audio log here, which is of course an Irrational Games staple.
Well, I think there's a lot of things you can do to bring value and to bring interest in the world, but I think the most important piece is that human element. I think where a lot of games get it wrong is they may have a lot of interesting things going on. They may have the most gorgeous environments, but without something to really connect with, I think people will tune it out. People have seen and they're used to gorgeous.
Yeah.
They're addicted to it, but that's not enough. You have to bring something fresh to the table, and I think a big part of that is, and you look at this space, it's lived in, it's believable. There are all these little mini dramas in every single nook and cranny. And it encourages you to poke your way around, and I think it brings that interest that makes the linearness of the experience irrelevant. Here's another sequence that was really tough to get right. Again, we're training some really outside the box concepts, the Big Daddies and Little Sisters, and
sure.
And so, the Would You Kindly thing was a great contrivance to make it so that your players can come in and start opening fire and all that. But the fact that this is a theater, originally this was just a sort of burnt out space, and it was just the player comes in and it's like, there's a sequence that goes on. And at one point in development, we had this all these theater assets from the Fort Frolic level, assets that Mo Teherina had built. And I was using for the Fort Frolic level. And I was like, hey, what if we made this into a little theater and you walk above there? And so generally speaking, when you want players to see something, you put it front and center, right? Ken always talks about the T-junction. You're walking down a hall, and then at the end of the hall is the T-junction where you're going to put the object of interest, and then you go left or right at the end. In this particular sequence, we have you come in from above, and we are able to light the space very theatrically because you're in a theater, right?
Yeah, literally.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was one of those happy accidents of development. Like, we had these assets, and oh wow, I've never seen someone shock that before. I'm impressed. I'm shocked that worked. That was actually another piece of huge internal debate. Was whether or not that should be, you can use the wrench on that. We have this whole sequence. If you go back for a second,
sure.
When the guy here gets knocked over, you can loot his body and you can get the pistol ammo, but obviously that's a limited resource. So the idea was originally the only way to get through the lock here
there?
was the gate was to shoot off the lock, and a lot of people were like, well, I have a wrench, I should be able to bash it off. And this huge debate, and I had gone through, if you look to the left actually, originally you see there's a vending machine here, a broken vending machine, and if you run out of pistol shots, this thing would spoot out some more. So
the circus of value.
That's Ken's voice, right?
I did not know that.
That clown, that's Ken. I've just ruined that for you now, haven't I? Or made it better.
Makes it better.
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes designers tend to overcomplicate things, and I was definitely falling into that trap there, where people were expecting, I'll just hit it with my wrench, and I was like, well, but that's not what the blockage is about. It's about making sure that you get the pistol at this point, and ultimately we pulled back, and the right answer was to let you even use Electro Bolt, apparently.
Yeah.
Quite the there we go. Quite the shootout.
If you spot a splicer in the water, hit him with the Electro Bolt.
I love that.
Yeah. I was always happy that this particular instance here was not, I believe Steven had added this one. Originally, the real training for Electro Bolt was in that restaurant, but it became optional as we removed some of the blockages that we just talked about, and so we duplicate it here, where you can come into the restaurant and shock the guys in the water, or if you haven't done that yet, we use that same training for here, and that was one of those things where you as you watch people play, you realize, okay, they're not playing exactly as we expected, and so you can either fight against that as a developer, or you can sort of engage with that and try and figure out ways to accommodate. And I think we were able to adapt in a lot of cases, and I think it makes the game more expressive and a lot better, obviously.
It's probably the last big question I would have for you here before we wrap up, because I could literally just play all of BioShock with you sitting here.
No
and
objections.
for me to ask questions too, and then it would be a 12-hour video. But I'd see if my BioShock skills are rusty.
Hey, fine.
I'm curious. You were a longtime veteran of Irrational, but the game that you did not come in, you were not there for System Shock 2, which is one of my all-time favorite. It's probably a top 5, if not definitely top 10 all-time favorite game for me. And BioShock is very much the spiritual successor to that, in my humble opinion.
Absolutely.
I think that's shared by a number of people.
That was the intent, honestly. Yeah.
As someone who was just a fan of, we'll wrap there. I'll wrap on this note as we come back in our Vita chamber, but. What did you take from System Shock 2 as a player, and then coming in as a developer on Irrational that would be applied here?
This is an awesome question, and honestly, I could go on and on about this. It was a great template and a great thing to have to refer back to during development, but at the same time, it did cause quite, I think, some confusion as well, because there was always the question of how much, what does a spiritual successor mean?
Yeah.
Like, how much do we want to pay homage versus actually, make a proper follow-up kind of situation. And so, there were a lot of things early on in development that were, I think, more in line with a lot of the sort of niggly bits of the System Shock 2 experience. We didn't ever have like weapon decay or anything like that, but there were a lot of like more in-depth RPG elements that frankly were, I think, bogging down the experience. I think it worked very well for System Shock 2, and I love those elements. But I think every game is different, and I think sometimes you go into an experience as a developer thinking, you have your in your mind's eye, you can picture what the experience is like, but when you no plan survives first contact, right? And so as you get into development, you realize that pieces aren't really adding up, and pieces aren't working, and so so as I was saying before, you can either sort of butt heads against that, or you can sort of like adapt and realize, okay, well, this isn't working. What can we do to adjust? And I think we made a lot of effort to make it so that we removed a lot of what were frustrations with System Shock 2, while really trying to focus on the experience of the narrative and the sort of the environmental storytelling, and the hybrid elements, the shooter with the RPG, and just I think it's more about a feeling to me. I think the key to a spiritual successor is about finding the right mix. Because you're never going to get that exactly right. You're never going to be able to. I think there are few games out there, after years and years go by, and even entire generations, as is the case with the Shock series, that you're able to slavishly recreate. I think your best bet is to try and again capture those feelings. So anyway, there's a whole lot of debate throughout development about what the right mix is, what the right balance. I'm certainly happy with where we wound up, but I think it really is about trying to be honest with yourself and to look very carefully about what the core elements are and what they actually say to the experience, versus like going point for point and saying like, okay, does it have weapon degradation? Yes or no. If it doesn't, then it's a failure. Or, I think it's about again creating those elements of those feelings, those whether it's fear, tension, whether it's resource scarcity, whatever it is, you sort of put all those ideas against the wall and constantly evaluate how they're feeling.
Well, your new game with your new studio, The Deep End, is called Perception. We are covering it all month long on IGN as part of IGN First, and it was fun to just dig into your past a little bit here with BioShock.
Yeah, you said
to
it.
see how it's going to inform your future with Perception. So be sure to check out Perception on IGN this month, or any month for that matter. It is a first-person horror narrative-based game where you play as a young blind girl, which is in and of itself a very unique thing. So, Bill, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great being here.
And replay BioShock again because it's fantastic. And check out Perception all month long on IGN.